This is Christian Gomez with the New American Magazine, and today on the program, a special guest, Congressman Thomas Massie of the 4th Congressional District of Kentucky. Tom, welcome to the program. We're glad to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on, Christian.
So, Congressman Massie, the president has already signed the USMCA implementation bill into law. However, back before the Christmas break on December 19th, you and Congressman Yoho of Florida were one of two only Republicans to vote against the bill, also along with Congressman Justin Amash, independent of Michigan. So, Congressman Massie, why did you vote against the USMCA bill?
Well, I had several reasons. Let's start out with the big general reason. It's really, I think, not a good idea to enter into multilateral agreements that require a new government to be set up that supersedes or is above Congress. And that's one of the problems with this USMCA. You know, I am for free trade. I think bilateral agreements are great. The president recently made a bilateral agreement with China, and that doesn't require any new government or any new court system like the World Trade Organization to be set up to tell Congress what to do. That's in a bilateral agreement, as like the one between China and the United States recently entered into by the president. If there's a disagreement, the two countries decide how to resolve the disagreement. Now, the USMCA relies on a committee because it involves Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So if there's a dispute, they don't leave it up to just the president of one country and another country or the Congresses of those two countries. It has to go to a committee. And now you've taken some of the power that should reside solely within Congress and within the president of the United States if we're going to maintain our sovereignty. You've taken some of that power and ceded it to, what's frankly a world government. And I don't think that's a healthy thing. I think our form of government is the best form of government you can get. And I think we should stick with it and maintain our sovereignty. There were a few other, more specific issues with the trade agreement that I have an issue with. For instance, a few years ago, Canada and Mexico sued the United States and forced us, and I'll get back to the word forced and what that means, but forced us to remove country of origin labeling for beef and pork. Now, check your shoes, check your iPhone, check the fruit you buy in the store, check the fish you buy in the store, check the tools you buy, check your car. They all have a country of origin label on them. That is to inform the consumer. I don't believe it's an unfair trade practice to have country of origin labels.
Absolutely.
But Canada and Mexico sued us in the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization agreed that it was an unfair trade practice for us to require labels for beef and pork. And so they came to Congress and told us, you all have to pass a bill and repeal country of origin labeling for beef and pork. Now, that rubbed me the wrong way. I was elected by 750,000 people here in Kentucky, where I am today, and not by some world organization. And I can't find anywhere in the Constitution where it mentions the World Trade Organization. So I had a problem with that. So, when they were negotiating this USMCA, I said we should get Canada and Mexico to withdraw their disagreement on country of origin labeling for beef and pork, and we should restore our sovereignty on that issue if I'm going to vote for this thing. Of course, I told you I had other problems with it, but this was sort of a test to see who's in control here. Is this really in the best interest of Americans' consumers and America's companies? If they can't fix this one little thing, this country of origin label, then maybe this isn't a good agreement. And so it was a litmus test for me. What I found out is they were not even willing to bring it up with the other countries. And so that's another reason that I voted against USMCA. Finally, this is a little bit in the weeds, but it's a really long agreement. And I believe most of my colleagues haven't read it. If they did read it, they would realize it's basically the TPP that a lot of people oppose, Trans-Pacific Partnership. And it's basically that glommed onto NAFTA. it's not a new NAFTA. None of the NAFTA went away. Okay, it's basically NAFTA 2.0, and even within those provisions, there were supposed to be protections for intellectual property in the United States, and those got stripped out. And so there's the third reason not to vote for USMCA. So ultimately, I couldn't, in good conscience, vote for it. I didn't believe at the end of the day it was good for 750,000 people in Kentucky, or for that matter, the country.
One of your former colleagues on the Senate side, Senator Jeff Sessions, when he was exposing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, he referred to it as a nascent European Union and referred to the then TPP Commission in Chapter 27 of the TPP as being as leading towards a Pacific Union. Now, what are your thoughts about the USMCA in terms of how do you foresee that affecting America's sovereignty in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair comparison to compare it to the European Union. Of course, we're not going to rely on one currency, or it doesn't go nearly that far, but it does have some of the same issues. And by the way, congratulations to Great Britain on Brexit here recently. I've met twice with Nigel Farage. I met with him in 2015 at the Conservative Opportunity Society. It's a group in Congress run by Stephen King. He brought Nigel Farage in, and he was talking to us about this thing called Brexit. And I was thinking, well, good luck with that. And then a year later, Nigel Farage came back, and I met with him in Senator Rand Paul's office, and he had been successful. He had accomplished the Brexit. He was ready to step down and move on to other things in life. And lo and behold, even though the people voted for it, the government they elected didn't go through with it. So it was another protracted 4-year battle for them to finally get out of that. But I think we don't need to be in another union. We don't need a North American union. We don't need a Pacific Union that we're joining and establishing a new government, if you will. I know in the USMCA, by the way, it relies on it doesn't rely on the World Trade Organization, or GATT. It sets up its own committee, but I still think it's problematic because a lot of the details in USMCA are basically left to the reader or left to that committee, and I think that's dangerous too.
Speaking of Nigel Farage, in his final speech at the European Union, he noted how his mother and father signed up to a common market, but not a political union, not to flags, anthems, presidents, and so forth. So in light of Farage's comments about the UK's Brexit from the UK, what are your thoughts of U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and the administration potentially pursuing a free trade agreement with the European Union? I mean, isn't this the same thing that President Obama was doing with TTIP?
Well, I'm excited about Brexit because now what this means is that our trade ambassador and our president can work on a bilateral agreement with Great Britain.
That's great news.
That is great news because being part of the European Union precluded that kind of cooperation. If you were going to work with Great Britain, then you had to fall under the EU umbrella. So I think that, the British stocks, the companies, they're all going to do better because now they're going to be able to enter into a stronger trade alliance with the United States. So I think it's good. I think we should be working with countries one-on-one, and this Brexit allows us to work with Great Britain one-on-one instead of going to the European Union.
So in 2016, right after the British people voted for Brexit, you coined the term Amexit. Can you tell us a little bit about what you meant by Amexit and how that's going along right now?
Yeah, I'm for an Amexit, or you can also call it Unexit, exiting the UN. So let's get America, the United States specifically, out of the United Nations and get the United Nations out of the United States of America. Because it's basically a group of dictators and despots that have as much power as we do. And I know there's a stronger group within the United Nations, a committee, sort of the super committee that we're part of. And people say, oh, well, we get the veto power, so we need to stay in that. But they haven't really seen what good it brings us. When we need allies, they're being pulled the other direction by the UN. And then occasionally the UN pulls us into wars and conflicts that we don't need to be involved in. And at the end of the day, the American taxpayer is footing the bill for it. So I think we need an Amexit or a unexit from the United Nations.
So the H.R. 204, which I believe is the American Sovereignty Restoration Act, it would repeal the United Nations Participation Act of 1945, which I did some research on that act. It was passed in the Senate by a lopsided vote at the time of 65-7 on December 4, 1945, shortly before President Truman signed it into law. So what would the process look like if the U.S. Congress in the future decided we're going to have an Amexit from, let's say, not just the UN, but the WTO perhaps, or the USMCA, or some other regional or global organization that we have joined with?
Oh, well, there would be a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth, and there would be predictions that the stock market would fall. But you can see, like, in that people would die. They would come up with some reason for that. But as you can see with Brexit, none of that is happening. Nobody has died yet over the Brexit. Nobody's going to die. Their economy is ultimately going to do better. But you would hear a tremendous voice, and it would be a lot of firms that are lobbying because they benefit from not being exposed to Congress and decisions of the president and decisions of the Congress. When trade decisions are made, it makes it a lot easier for them. They can just go to this committee, which is comprised of some of them already, and lobby for what they want in these extra constitutional government organizations. So obviously those people would prefer it, and they would be spelling gloom and doom if we got out. But I think it would be a step forward. And then we can, by the way, and I'm not saying we need to be protectionist or that we shouldn't be involved in free trade. I mean, you can do free trade unilaterally. You can just say, look, we're not going to tariff your stuff. Like, if you tariff your stuff, you're basically taxing your consumers. There's a way to do it unilaterally, or you can do it bilaterally. But you definitely don't need to enter into some kind of agreement that sets up a new government that is more powerful than Congress.
But referring specifically to like the USMCA or the WTO, to withdraw from those organizations, would Congress have to pass a bill to repeal their initial entry into those agreements?
Well, it dates back to GATT. There's an agreement there that set up things in the 90s, and those were passed by Congress. And then some of these things may have been entered into as treaties, and I'm not exactly sure. You'd have to go back and look at the way each of them was specifically set up in order to get back out of it. But it would take though what has happened in Britain. It would take the voice of the people. Like, Congress wouldn't easily or willingly do this. Yes. They would have to be pushed by the people, and only if the people could see that they would be better off under bilateral or unilateral free trade agreements.
Now, speaking about repealing measures in Congress, just on Friday, the House passed a resolution to repeal the 2002 authorization for the use of force against Iraq, and that passed 236 to 166. And you were part of that 236, I believe, that voted to repeal the authorization into Iraq. So why is this bill important, and how long are we going to stay in Iraq?
Well, I hate to try and answer the second question, but the first question's easy to answer why it's important. I was actually the lead Republican co-sponsor of the Barbara Lee legislation to repeal the Iraq AUMF. So this was an easy thing for me to vote, even though I don't think they went about it in a good process in Congress. I mean, our whole argument has been that we need to debate these things, and we need to debate whether we're at war or not. And the Democrats passed it like as an amendment to some gold coin bill so that they could curtail the debate. So I don't really agree with the process by which this came to the floor. I don't think it's healthy for the country. But I do agree with the underlying sentiment that we should repeal the Iraq AUMF, because the problem is, if we have troops over there, they have to be defended. Look, the commander-in-chief has to protect any of our troops who are over there. But the problem is they really shouldn't be over there now. We're trying to nation build. The nation that's being built is largely aligned with Iran. I mean, it was before it wasn't a Shia government. Now it's more of a Shia government than a Sunni government or an ecumenical government. And we built, I'll call it a compound, but our embassy over there is the biggest embassy in the world. It's like 100 acres.
It's about the size of the Vatican, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm running 60 head of cattle on 100 acres, and they basically have buildings on all of that and a tremendous amount of payroll and the light bill, if you can imagine. But the thing that bothers me most about that embassy and the size of it is I believe that the neocons got it built as sort of a boat anchor to make sure that in spite of the wishes of the American people, that we would be politically and militarily constrained to stay there and protect that embassy. I mean, we should have built a modest building, right, instead of investing in a 100-acre embassy. And that way, if things go south, you pack things up, you put it in a suitcase, and you get out of there. But the way it is now, there would be such a public outcry to leave a 100-acre embassy. Can you imagine if it were burning, if it were in flames, how big the flames would be and the outcry from the people? So I think it was sort of a crafty way for the neocons to anchor U.S. intervention there for decades to come. And that would be one of the arguments that people will put up to keep us in Iraq. Because what about the embassy? What about the diplomats? Well, look, I'm talking to you, using technology. We're in different states. We can conduct diplomacy the same way in countries where it's dangerous.
You often see that like in science fiction and action movies as well. So why do we have to have embassies? Isn't this an archaic practice to send an ambassador from one country to another and to have to permanently stay there? Can't they get the communication in real time like we're doing right now?
Yeah. It's not just archaic, it's unsafe. I mean, look at our other embassies and the things that have befallen them, and they should have been protected more securely. But at the end of the day, that's again, once you have assets there, you have to protect them, and you have to protect
Absolutely.
the people who are in them. And my argument would be use the technology to conduct diplomacy in places where it is unsafe instead of putting our diplomats at risk. And then if you need to travel there, well, then travel there, have your visit, and then come back. I mean, so that's what we should be doing in Iraq. And the AUMF is important. You asked how many years are we going to be there, how many more years? I'm concerned. We're going to be there a long time. But you know what? Even if we decide to stay there for a long time, there needs to be a debate, because only 15% of the people I serve with even voted on that original AUMF. Like 85% of Congress has never debated whether we should be in Iraq, even the first time. And we've gone astray. The government has changed. I mean, Saddam has been deposed and executed. There is no government to fight against that the AUMF authorized. So I say repeal that AUMF. If you think we need to keep a military presence in Iraq, then let's debate that. Let's debate the terms of that, and let's put some constraints on the budget and how long we're going to be there.
Congressman Massie, thank you so much for being with us on the program. We hope to have you on again in the future, of course, and continue fighting for making sure that we stay out of these unconstitutional wars and unconstitutional trade blocks.
Yeah, well, thank you for covering this. Thank you for informing the people. I get the New American magazine at my home, and you'll find stuff in there. You'll find votes explained that aren't explained anywhere else. And so I appreciate what you all are doing there at New American.